The studio lights blazed down on the polished stage of a primetime television debate. Cameras zoomed in on two figures seated across from one another, separated only by a sleek glass table and an ocean of tension. On one side sat Kristi Noem, her sharp eyes fixed on the audience as if to claim authority before the conversation even began. On the other sat Ibrahim Traoré, calm yet unyielding, his posture steady like a soldier who had carried his people's burdens far beyond the studio walls. The moderator introduced the topic, Africa's growing independence from Western influence. Almost immediately, Noem leaned forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "Let's be honest," she said with a smirk that widened under the studio lights. "Countries like yours wouldn't stand a chance without the structures we've built. Without us, Africa collapses. That's just reality." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others visibly uncomfortable. The cameras cut to Traoré. His face remained composed, his eyes locked on Noem as if her words bounced harmlessly off a shield forged from history itself. He waited until the whispers settled, then spoke with deliberate calm. "If collapse were our destiny, madam, it would have already happened long ago. What you call survival through your structures, we call chains we chose to break." The room grew still. Even the host seemed unsure how to transition. Noem tried to interject, but Traoré raised a hand slightly, not in rudeness, but in authority. "You think Africa's strength comes from your approval," he continued, his voice resonant and clear. "But strength doesn't ask permission. It grows from the soil, from the will of the people who refuse to kneel." The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was weight. The kind that presses down when truth enters a room. Cameras caught Noem's smirk faltering, if only for a second, while the audience erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause. The moderator, sensing the rising tension, leaned forward with a cautious smile. "Governor Noem, Captain Traoré has raised a powerful point. Do you care to respond?" Noem did not hesitate. She tilted her head back slightly, her smirk returning as if she had never faltered. "Powerful point? No. It's rhetoric. Romantic speeches don't feed people. They don't build schools. They don't keep the lights on. What we provide, our investments, our governance models, that's what keeps fragile states alive. Without us, you'd be adrift." The studio audience erupted into divided reactions, some clapped, others booed. The cameras panned to Traoré again. He leaned forward now, his presence unmistakably commanding, as though the weight of centuries spoke through him. "You speak of feeding people," Traoré said, his tone sharpened like a blade. "But tell me, Governor, who grows the food? Who mines the gold? Who digs the earth for the resources your countries thrive upon? It is not your hands in the soil, it is ours. You take, then return crumbs, and call it generosity." The audience stirred again, and this time, the applause outweighed the jeers. Noem's smile tightened, but she tried to mask it with laughter. "So, you want to claim you can do better without us?" she asked mockingly. Traoré's reply was swift, cutting through the noise. "Not want to claim. We are doing better without you. Every seed we plant without your shadow grows stronger. Every bridge we build with our own hand stands taller than the ones you left behind." The crowd's roar filled the studio, some even rising to their feet. The cameras caught the visible discomfort in Noem's expression as Traoré leaned back, his calm restored. He had said enough to turn the tide of the debate. The moderator tried to steady the heated exchange, but the tension in the studio had already grown into something uncontainable. The cameras zoomed in on Traoré, whose eyes carried both defiance and calm. Across from him, Noem adjusted her microphone, her smirk fading into something colder, more calculated. "You speak as if Africa can simply cut ties and thrive overnight," Noem said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Do you think industries spring out of thin air? Do you think order maintains itself without guidance? Without us, your systems collapse. That is not opinion, that is fact. A hush fell over the crowd. Some leaned forward, eager to see how Traoré would respond. He remained still for a moment, then spoke with deliberate clarity. Order. You confuse order with control. Collapse? We lived through centuries of theft and yet we stand. We endured your guidance and yet we rise. If you call dependence survival, then you misunderstand what it means to live. The audience erupted again, this time louder, their applause echoing like thunder across the studio. Noem's expression tightened, her rehearsed confidence was slipping. You sound brave now, she snapped, but bravery doesn't build nations. Without partnerships, without allies, you are alone. Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady but sharper than ever. Alone? Look around, Governor. We are not alone. Africa stands together. And when we stand together, no empire, past or present, can dictate our future. The crowd rose to their feet in applause, drowning out the moderator's attempts to restore order. The clash had transcended a debate, it was now a symbolic battlefield. The lights in the studio glared down, catching the tension between the two figures like a spotlight on a duel. The moderator tried again to cut in, but his voice was drowned out by the waves of clapping, shouting, and murmuring from the audience. Everyone knew they weren't just watching a debate, they were watching a confrontation that symbolized something far greater. Kristi Noem leaned back in her chair, a calculated pause before she delivered her next line. Symbolism doesn't feed your people, she said, her tone sharp. Dreams don't build roads or schools. The United States has poured billions into nations like yours, and yet here you are, lecturing us. Tell me, Captain, what has Burkina Faso given the world? The crowd gasped at the audacity of the remark. It was a question meant to belittle, to reduce Traoré's leadership into insignificance. But Traoré did not flinch. Instead, he straightened in his seat, his uniform catching the studio lights, and answered with the calm of someone who carried history on his shoulders. What has Burkina Faso given? He repeated slowly, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. We have given resistance. We have given dignity. We have given proof that even the smallest of nations can rise when they choose courage over chains. That is more valuable than any loan wrapped in conditions or any aid tied to obedience. The room shook with applause. Some members of the audience stood, clapping and cheering as if they were in a rally, not a TV studio. Noem's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward again, her voice colder now, almost biting. You think this applause will protect you? It won't. Reality is harsher than words. Traoré turned to face her directly, his expression steady, his voice cutting through the noise like steel, and yet, it is words like these that reveal the truth. You mistake control for help. You mistake silence for consent. But Africa is no longer silent, and we do not need protection, we need respect. The moderator, overwhelmed, finally called for a break, but the cameras had already captured what millions would remember, a leader who turned an insult into a declaration of sovereignty. The cameras came back from the commercial break, but the energy in the room hadn't settled. If anything, the tension was thicker. Viewers across America, Africa, and beyond were glued to their screens, waiting for the clash to continue. The debate wasn't just politics anymore, it had become a spectacle of pride, defiance, and power. Kristi Noem smirked again, though the edge of unease flickered in her eyes. She tried to regain control of the narrative. Respect, she repeated with a mocking tone. Respect is earned, Captain. And without the structures and order we've built, countries like yours wouldn't even exist on the global map. Do you really think Burkina Faso could stand alone without us? The audience murmured, some nodding, others gasping at the condescension. Traoré leaned forward now, his voice firm but calm, as though he had been preparing for this exact attack his entire life. Burkina Faso existed long before your aid. Africa thrived long before your borders. And if we stand today, it is not because of your structures, it is despite them. You do not get to define our worth. The crowd erupted again, this time with thunderous applause that drowned out even the moderator's desperate attempts to restore order. Some audience members rose to their feet, chanting his name softly, Traoré, Traoré, until it grew louder, a rhythm that filled the studio. Noem's expression hardened. She raised her hand slightly, gesturing for calm, and fired back, her voice sharp, "Pride is not policy. Applause is not strategy. When the cameras turn off, when the lights dim, what will remain? Empty promises?" Traoré's eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "What will remain," he said slowly, his words carrying the weight of a continent, "is a people who no longer bow. That is the foundation of every strategy, every policy, every dream. And that is something you cannot erase." The audience roared louder than ever. Viewers online began flooding social media, clipping the moment in real time. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was history being written live on air. The moderator, clearly overwhelmed, tried once more to restore order, his voice cracking through the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep this professional." But it was too late, the debate had transformed into something much larger than scripted talking points. Kristi Noem leaned back in her chair, her smirk returning, this time with more venom. "Bold words," she said coldly. "But bold words don't build economies. They don't secure borders. Without the safety net we've provided for decades, your nation would crumble in days. You think applause will shield you from reality?" The audience grew restless. Some booed her statement, others clapped, feeding the escalating divide in the room. Traoré didn't flinch. He raised his hand, commanding silence without force, just presence. When the murmurs settled, he spoke with clarity, every word echoing like a drumbeat. "You mistake dependence for survival. You mistake silence for acceptance. My people are not fragile because they do not rely on your net. They are strong because they've carried the weight of their struggles without you." Gasps rippled through the audience. His tone was not defensive, it was declarative, like a verdict. Noem chuckled bitterly, shaking her head. "You're a dreamer, Captain. And dreamers don't last long in the real world." Traoré leaned closer, eyes burning with conviction. "No," he said firmly, "dreamers don't last, unless their dream belongs to millions. And mine does." The studio fell into stunned silence. Even the moderator, for once, had no words. Online, hashtags were already exploding, hashtag Traoré vs Noem, hashtag Africa Speaks, hashtag Dreams of Millions. The clash wasn't just trending, it was dominating the global conversation. The moderator, finally regaining composure, turned to Traoré. "Captain, some say your vision is idealistic. That without partnerships from powerful nations, Africa will remain vulnerable. How do you respond?" Traoré leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "They confuse partnership with control. True partnerships are built on equality, not hierarchy. Africa doesn't reject cooperation, we reject domination." His words struck deep, echoing across the hall. For a brief moment, even those who doubted him paused, considering the raw conviction in his voice. Kristi Noem scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Spoken like a politician trying to stir emotions. But let's be clear, you don't set the rules. Global power does. And we are that power." The audience stirred uneasily, some nodding, others visibly offended by her bluntness. Traoré didn't raise his voice. Instead, he allowed a silence to stretch, making her words hang heavy in the air. Then he replied. "Power without legitimacy is a shadow. You may set rules in your chambers, but in the streets of Ouagadougou, in the villages of Africa, our people are writing their own rules, and they don't include you." The room erupted. Cheers thundered from sections of the audience, drowning out the faint boos from Noem's supporters. Social media lit up instantly, clips of his retort spreading like wildfire. Noem, visibly rattled, forced a tight smile. Strong rhetoric, she said sharply, but words won't protect you when the world demands obedience. Traoré leaned back calmly, his voice carrying across the hall, then the world will learn what defiance looks like. The camera zoomed in, capturing the intensity of the moment. Commentators whispered to one another in the press booth, already predicting headlines, "Traoré defies Washington on live TV." The energy in the studio was electric, every word carrying the weight of history. Kristi Noem, visibly annoyed by the roaring support Traoré had received, slammed her hand on the table. "Defiance," she spat. "Defiance leads to chaos. Your so-called independence is just weakness dressed up as pride. Without America, without our structure, Africa will fall apart. That's the truth." The moderator raised a hand to calm the tension, but Traoré was already speaking, his tone steady but burning with conviction. "No, Madame Noem. The truth is what our people live every day. We have carried the weight of foreign control for decades, and survived. If we can survive that, we can thrive without you. What you call chaos, we call freedom. What you call weakness, we call resilience." The audience erupted once more. Applause mixed with cheers, and the hashtag #AfricaSpeaks began trending online. Around the world, people tuned in, some stunned, others inspired. Noem forced a laugh, but her voice cracked slightly. Bold words for a leader of such a small nation. Don't mistake the sympathy of crowds for real power. When the lights go off, it's still our decisions that shape the future. Traoré leaned in, his eyes unwavering. "Then perhaps it's time the world saw a future shaped not in your halls of power, but in the hearts of free people. And let me assure you, when Africa writes its future, your name won't be on the page." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Kristi Noem had no retort. The moderator, sensing the weight of the silence, tried to interject. "Perhaps we should move to the next question." But Traoré raised his hand gently, commanding the room without force. "No, let this moment breathe," he said, his voice carrying a rare calm power. The audience leaned in, captivated. Cameras zoomed closer, recording every nuance of his expression. "Noem speaks of size, of numbers, of influence," Traoré continued. "But history is not written by the loudest voices, nor by the biggest armies. History is written by those who refuse to bow, no matter the pressure. Burkina Faso stands, not because of its size, but because of its spirit. And Africa," he paused, scanning the audience, "Africa is not small. Africa is vast, and its people are awakening." The applause was thunderous, almost shaking the studio. Even viewers watching from home could feel the ground shift. Social media exploded with clips, Traoré's words echo through history, "Africa's awakening begins now." Kristi Noem clenched her jaw, her smile now more of a grimace. She leaned toward the microphone. "Strong speeches don't build nations. You will see, words fade. Power remains." Traoré's gaze sharpened. "Then you've misunderstood power. Real power isn't the threat of a fist, it's the strength of a people standing together. And you'll see, Madame Noem, that such power never fades." The studio was electric. The clash was no longer just between two leaders, it had become symbolic, a collision of two worldviews. The moderator tried once more to steer the conversation, but by now it was clear, this debate had transformed into something far larger. The clash between Traoré and Noem was no longer just a television exchange, it was a battle of symbols, destined to ripple across continents. Traoré leaned forward, his tone measured yet resolute. "If you think Africa will be silenced by dismissal, you are mistaken. For decades, our voices were ignored. But today, our voices rise together, and they will not be drowned out by arrogance or mockery." Noem exhaled sharply, folding her arms. The defiance on her face only highlighted her inability to contain the moment slipping from her grasp. Every camera captured it, her forced composure, his unshakable confidence. Then, with a quiet intensity, Traoré delivered the line that would define the night: "You can belittle a person, but you cannot belittle a people. Africa is awake. And we do not ask permission to stand tall." The studio erupted. Some applauded standing, others sat in stunned silence. The sound of clapping, chants of support, and the flash of cameras fused into a wave that surged beyond the walls of the studio. Within minutes, hashtags trended worldwide: hashtag Africa stands tall, hashtag Traoré vs Noem, hashtag voices unbroken. Memes, clips, and fiery debates spread across platforms, proving that this wasn't just a debate, it was a cultural earthquake. Kristi Noem shifted in her chair, knowing the optics had already slipped out of her control. Traoré, however, remained composed, his face steady, his presence immovable. The moderator concluded in a strained voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have witnessed more than a debate. We've witnessed a defining moment." And with that, the lights dimmed, but the echoes of Traoré's words spoken with both steel and spirit, would reverberate long after the cameras went dark.